Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of the Lord Ninja Choke podcast. I'm Will, and I'm based in the UK. And as always, I'm joined by Josh in Australia and Dom in the US. It feels great to have finally hit double-digit episodes, with this being our 10th. And I know I speak for the three of us when I say that we've had a great time recording these podcasts so far, and the support and the response that we've had from everyone has only really motivated us to want to do more. This week's episode is going to focus on UFC Nashville or UFC Tennessee. I'm not actually sure what the official title is of the event, but either way, it's headlined by Derrick Lewis and Tallison Teixeira. As always, before we get into the upcoming card, we'll take a very quick look at last week's result for UFC 317 Topuria versus Oliveira. We managed to get 4 of our 6 predictions correctly, which has brought our record to 20 wins and 7 losses, which I believe is a 74% accuracy. So overall, I think we're really happy with that. But one of the key things that are pretty great is that we looked at a new confidence-ometer last week, where the other co-hosts were able to give a +1 if they wanted to the breakdown and the pick of the fights. And as you can see from the graphic on screen, if you're watching on YouTube, the confidence that we added to the 4 breakdowns that won was in correlation with them being winners. So essentially, we were more confident on the ones that did win and less confident on the ones that didn't. So Joshua Van, Beneil Dariush, Peyton Talbot, and Jonathan Deniz all came through as our winners, with Jack Hermansson and Vyacheslav Borshev coming up as our losses. Also, shout out to Dom, who went 2 out of 2. And also picked underdogs on both occasions. So he's the guy to listen to at the moment, by the sounds of it. So before we get into next week, we'll just very quickly fly through our individual results from a betting perspective. Looking at my slate, really happy overall. Had a really good event. So 12.75 units staked and 8.7 units profited was a return on investment of 68%. With my picks going 9 and 2. So very happy with that overall. It was very unlike me to be going for underdogs, but I focused on Beneil Dariush, Peyton Talbot, Jack Hermansson, and Vivia Rougeau. I only went 2 and 2 there, but that's a testament to why betting on underdogs is the way, really, with MMA, because obviously that put me in profit. Also, my passionate speech about Jonathan Deniz and his opponent, Regional Hines, turned out to be pretty worthwhile. I think I did a great job there in highlighting something that was like -200 at the time, which I think went off at like -500 or close to that. So not only, a good bet in the actual fight itself, but a nice bit of line analysis. So yeah, really happy with how that went. Also, obviously hitting a +490 parlay with the 3 of our most confident picks was very nice as well. So all in all, a very good card for me, and it's nice to have one of those after a month or so of very sort of tepid results. But yeah, very happy.
Yeah, and I was actually at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas to watch the fight, so it was a memorable night for myself. It would have been a great night from a betting perspective if I hadn't have spent 3 units expecting the main event to go to round 2. So nearly like an excellent night, but slightly marred by that weird notion that somehow Charles Oliveira could survive to round 2 when he clearly never had any intention of surviving. He went straight in like a madman and got his just desserts. But yeah, there was some great fights in the middle of the main card. Already mentioned by Will, the Talbot fight, Dariush and Van was like a three fight streak from a betting perspective that was very profitable. Yeah, weirdly, picking Kattar France wasn't such a good pick. I thought he would be a bit more competitive, but that the grappling of Pantoja just completely nullified Kattar France. And to be honest, I'd be a bit worried if they match up Pantoja straight away with Van, because I just haven't. I don't know if Van can cope with that kind of grappling intensity. I guess we'll find out soon enough. But yeah, good night overall, and I'll hand over to Josh.
Yeah. What can I say? I was looking pretty decent early on. With Smith being a lock, winning in obvious fashion. It was a crazy fight, and I mean Smith did dominate. But then, as soon as Borshev fought, it all went to shit. Like Ariasha didn't land, Emil didn't land, Hermansson didn't land. As you can see, it's basically a downhill slope. until the main card really takes off, and that's when I kind of picked up some momentum again. In terms of my locks, both Topuria and Smith won, so my lock record's kind of improved. But for my accuracy for this year, it took a bit of a hit. It's still a personal best by about 0.4%, but really, I mean, you can ask Will and Dom. I was fucking hammering myself over this, and I was really, really peeved. But yeah, I mean, on to brighter pastures, you know.
Yeah, that's always the way it's got to be, really. I mean, one event is a drop in the ocean by the time the year is over, so just got to dust yourself off when those events happen. But anyway, we move on to this week's card, UFC Tennessee. Derrick Lewis and Tallison Teixeira headline the card. Does anyone have any thoughts about the card as a whole? Any fights jump out to you? What are you excited to see?
Yeah, I mean, looking at it, it looks pretty exciting. Like, I mean, almost every single fight there has kind of fireworks written all over it. I mean, Max Griffin and Chris Curtis does stand out to me a little bit because they're both really, really high amplitude, kind of high volume fighters. And I guess for each fight, there is a bit of a narrative there about how this fighter is going to win against that guy. I mean, in one case, Walter Walker versus Kennedy and Zetriku, you know, we see a great striker versus a bloated wrestler who can attack the heel hook really quickly. So there's always a bit of a intrigue there for me. But overall, really, this whole card looks like a really, really good and fun fight night.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's pleasant. It's a pleasant surprise to be saying this is, you know, not the worst card of all time, but actually quite a good fight night card with some fights here which would, you know, not be misplaced on a numbered card. You know, when Nate Landwehr fights, it's always exciting. We've got some stalwarts in Matthews and Njokwani. And of course, you know, fan favorite Derrick Lewis is headlining, which is an interesting choice for a 5-round fight. We'll get to that. And yeah, of course, you know, Kattar and Garcia. Kattar. We talked about this before the podcast. It's Kattar. The first time it comes up and I say Kattar.
Yeah, I think I said before we recorded that I'm putting the under and the over at 4.5 for the number of mispronunciations for Calvin Kattar's surname, because I'm also hardwired to call him Kattar, and I don't know why. Maybe it's a British thing. But yeah, I'm surprised actually that you guys are so keen on this card. I also do agree with you that, like, you know, top to bottom, it does look like a fun one from a fan perspective. But when I started breaking it down, I don't know, but I think I'd just be really underwhelmed if I was going to this event live to see like Derrick Lewis in a main event in 2025 and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson in a co-main event in 2025. It's, you know, they're big names. It's fine, and all of the fights do stylistically look fun, but I don't know. I feel like it's just for an actual like non-Apex card. I feel like it hardly. I imagine the tickets didn't like sell super quick because people were rushing to watch Derrick Lewis in his next main event. I don't know. I'm just a hater. Ignore me. But anyway, as always, we've picked a fight each. We're going to be looking at in a bit more detail. I somehow have chosen the main event, and Josh is going to be looking at Nate Landwehr versus Morgan Charriere, with Dom looking at Calvin Kattar versus Steve Garcia. So before we get into it, one final reminder, something we added last week, the confidenceometer. Basically, the person who is sort of running the breakdown of the fight, who takes the initial breakdown of it, will give a rating between 1 and 3, depending on how confident they are in their pick for the actual fight itself. And then our other two co-hosts can kind of co-sign that pick by giving it an extra +1, which therefore obviously gives us a rating between 1 and 5 for how confident we are. And as I said, for UFC 317, this system worked really well, with our more confident ones being the ones that won and the less confident ones being the ones that lost. So perhaps it's actually quite useful. The main event of the evening is Derrick Lewis versus Tallison Teixeira. And yeah, it surprised me that even I'm the one who chose this main event, because historically I am firstly a massive hater of heavyweight MMA, because it it kind of highlights and demonstrates all the things I don't like about MMA, which is God-given gifts being the things that push you to the top, and a lack of athleticism and well-roundedness and general mixed martial arts ability being less at the forefront when it comes to your success rate. And no fighter in UFC history has ever demonstrated this better than Derrick Lewis. He is the final boss of heavyweight MMA, as far as I'm concerned. And I've never been a fan of him. I've always been a massive Derrick Lewis hater. I don't know for sure how many times I have attempted to bet on his fights, but I'm quite certain I've never bet on Derrick Lewis before. I must have faded him multiple times. And I actually think my record in doing so is pretty 50-50. He is a thorn in my side because regardless of any logic that you put into a breakdown of a Derrick Lewis fight from tape and watching, stylistics or anything, that heavyweight Derrick Lewis right hand goes brr, as they say. So, yeah, Derrick Lewis, what a guy. He has 15 knockouts. It's the most in UFC history. And yeah, his power is undeniable. He is never out of a fight because he can change it in an instant with a single punch. Tallison Teixeira, on the other hand, somebody we obviously don't know so much of. He has an 8-0 record, and all of his wins, I believe, have come from early finishes. 6 of those wins came in the regional scene, and as I always like to do, combining the record of all of his opponents at the time in which he fought them, I believe leads to a record of 9 wins and 19 losses for his opponents, which, I think immediately kind of gives a demonstration that he hasn't fought the highest level of competition. But I think that honestly, that's more so just heavyweight MMA. It's not got a very rich regional scene, and it's definitely the weight class that obviously brings out the most chances, like the kind of people that fight on regional level cards that don't necessarily have a bright future in MMA and are more so just showing up for the paycheck, I would imagine. It's a great way to kind of segue that from comparing last week with Alvin Hines, who is someone else who I watched the regional tape of and was very much like, this guy is not UFC level. And it was quite evident to see that. I mean, I actually think he put in a really good display given his actual capabilities. So, yeah, I think nothing kind of highlights how the jump to UFC level quite like seeing what happened to Alvin Hines last week. Also, the guy that Teixeira fought on Dana White's Contender Series now has a record of 6-3, which is equally not that impressive either. I don't think there are many guys who fight on Dana White's Contender Series that have a record of 6-2 or 6-3. So, personally, I think that's another fight to be sort of chalked up as like doubtful. And finally, Teixeira fought Justin Taffer in his debut. He looked good in that fight. I can't lie at all. He had a very good mixture of pressure and volume, and he caught Taffer with a nice shot and dropped him quite early in the fight. But again, Justin Taffer. I don't know how Justin Taffer always seems to end up in the conversation of being on the main card, but what exactly has that guy done to really put the fear in you? I think his only win in the UFC is against Parker Porter, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, I mean, that's a massive takedown of both guys' records. But I think the conclusion that I'm trying to make there is, what exactly has Tallison Teixeira done that is impressive in his UFC career, or even his MMA career in general? When you compare him against the most prolific KO threat that the UFC has ever seen, a man who has knocked out more men than anyone else in UFC history, I don't personally see what it is that Teixeira has that previous opponents haven't had against Derrick Lewis, because Derrick Lewis is not somebody that you can traditionally cap. As I said earlier on, you cannot watch tape on Derrick Lewis and come to a logical conclusion about how the fight is going to go with any supreme confidence, because Derrick Lewis is one of the most one-dimensional guys. It's hardly even a full dimension. He's like half-dimensional, which basically means that I don't think he should ever have been a favorite in an MMA fight, because on paper, he should lose to everybody, whether that's jab him at distance and don't get hit by the big shot or take him down. It seems very easy on paper, I think. And most of the time, Derrick Lewis is losing a fight until suddenly he just wins it with one punch. So, yeah, all of the typical MMA variables when you look at a fight, I think are mostly irrelevant here, such as Teixeira having a size advantage. Yeah, that is true. But I think from watching his UFC debut, you can see that he's not a Volkov style guy who wants to measure that distance and use straight shots whilst not sort of walking forward. He's very much a brawler. And I personally don't like it when tall guys are brawlers, because a lot of them have the tall man defense, and that they're very exposed to being hit with shorter shots, obviously hooks. And also, having those longer arms, a longer reach isn't necessarily useful when all you're doing is throwing shorter shots in close. What other intangibles have we got for this fight? Derrick Lewis is now 40 years old, which is a cursed number for a lot of people. A lot of people are not fans of any fighter once they hit 40 years old. I don't personally think that matters half as much as people say it does. I mean, Lewis himself is still capable of knocking guys out who are younger than him, such as Rodrigo Nascimento in his last fight. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, I'm not able to give you a very strong campaign for why one guy wins this fight over the other, because if I was to break it down in that aspect, I would say that Teixeira has advantages in certain areas, but at the end of the day, I just think we're talking about a guy who is incredibly green here. And if we were to fast forward a few years and we look back on Tallison Teixeira's career, is he a top 15 guy? Is he somebody who is capable of taking on this big step up in competition against a fighter that the crowd loves, the UFC loves, who is dangerous and is respected? You can't be the most prolific KO artist in UFC history and not be respected. And that also may turn into something that shows up in the fight as well. I mean, we've seen it before. Guys can get quite hesitant when they're fighting against Derrick Lewis, because who wants to come rushing in on the dude with the most dangerous hands in the UFC? So yeah, I can't give you a strong prediction, and I can't give you a strong breakdown really, because Derrick Lewis is such a enigma and such a different fighter. But what I can tell you is, with the betting odds the way they are, Tallison Teixeira is -250, and I cannot really, from having watched it, seen anything that really demonstrates that to be like an accurate representation of this fight, aside from the fact that Derrick Lewis is rubbish until he wins, but his career has proven that doesn't mean shit. So Derrick Lewis at plus 200, I think, is a value bet that for a small amount everybody should be considering making here. Personally, I bet it at plus 175, thinking that was the move, and it's now moved to plus 200. So it's a low confidence bet. It definitely, on the confidence-ometer, is a 1. So don't go putting this in your parlays or putting a significant amount of money on it. Absolutely not. But I think having a small sprinkle on Derrick Lewis is a perfectly reasonable thing to be doing here. So for the first time in my life, I'm going to be cheering for the Black Beast.
Yeah, well, I wasn't expecting that. But now you've mentioned it, and I'm thinking about it more and more. I guess Tallison Teixeira is going to be navigating completely new waters, I guess, in terms of the size of the crowd and the size of the occasion. So those are also intangibles that will play in Derrick Lewis's favor. For him, this is just like, to be honest, another day in the office. He's got 40 or 30 UFC fights. I think he's 19-10 in the UFC. Yeah, I actually have a bet on Tallison Teixeira, but I know how I can hedge it. I think someone already mentioned this in your Discord, that if you're going to take Derrick Lewis, to be honest, if you're going to take Tallison Teixeira as well, you're playing the short odds is not a good idea. Obviously, I threw him in a parlay. It's probably just to take a KO prop pretty early, right? Like Derrick Lewis KO round 1 or 2. Same with Tallison Teixeira as well. I mean, he's got no tape. All his fights end within a minute or so. He throws like crazy. I think, the thing about Derrick is that he's possibly, despite his win against Rodrigo Nascimento, as you mentioned, well, he's possibly just not in it anymore. He's been losing a lot recently. And not necessarily fights that are, that he should be winning, because it's like Jailton Almeida at the top of the division, Sergey Spivak, Sergey Pavlovich. I mean, Tai Tuivasa's not a great look, but he's not losing to anyone, who's not top tier heavyweight. But the thing is, he is losing. And Rodrigo Nascimento, that win hasn't aged too well, because Nascimento's now in the PFL, and he's losing in the PFL, or barely winning a split decision against Abraham Babley in a fight that I had to endure. So whilst I can definitely see the Lewis angle, I think I just feel like if Teixeira, if the tape that I've seen, which is I watched his 2 UFC wins, if he comes out like that, I think that yes, Lewis could obviously fight back, and it will be, he'll always be live for the KO. I think Teixeira is going to put him away early. That's the way I see it. Just the volume, right? It's the exuberance of youth. Of course, it's risky. So definitely, as you said, I definitely wouldn't be putting too much money on Teixeira. To be honest, the safest bet is just, I think, some sort of under. The fight ends in KO in round 1, or fight under 1.5, something like that. It's probably safer. What are your thoughts, Josh?
I have many thoughts about this one, but also barely any. I'm gonna try and break down only Lewis here because I have done minimal tape on Teixeira, and what minimal means here is none. I expect Lewis to be a bit funky. He kind of plays possum at times, and I don't really like to get a read on Lewis these days because he doesn't really fight like someone who takes fighting seriously. He has kind of spoken about using fouls to his advantage in his interviews, and I know that people are kind of shrugging that aside, saying, "Yeah, that's nothing. That's Lewis being Lewis," But what if it isn't? I expect maybe Lewis to do some John Jones shit and just reach out with his fingers and try and find the G spot behind Teixeira's eyes, all that stuff. But if he doesn't, I still expect Lewis to play possum if he gets hurt, or at least crowd up a little bit and then throw back some huge hammer fists or some massive overhand strikes. It's hard to break down a Lewis fight because at the moment he really does seem to be a paycheck fighter, just there for the paycheck. And that sucks to say because I am a huge fan of Lewis. I fell for the hype when he took off his shorts and said his balls was hot, So it just feels weird to say what I'm about to say, but I'm gonna fade Lewis here. I don't really think that he's gonna win. I don't trust his antics in the cage to pay off greatly. I expect maybe Teixeira to land some heavy attacks. Lewis curls over or covers up and doesn't fight back, and then the ref's going to call it off in the early first 2 rounds, maybe. So yeah, when Will was talking about how unpredictable he fights and how no matter how much tape you do, he's going to do the opposite of what you see and all that shit. Personally, out of 13 fights that I've predicted with Lewis being involved, only 7 of those fights are correct for me, and that's a testament to how unpredictable he is, because when it comes to my predictions and to categorize stuff, I predict heavyweights the most accurately out of all the weight classes, and Lewis has been a stain on that record. So I can't trust him. He's 40 years old. He's nearing the end of his career. He's going to get a nice big fat paycheck, and he's probably going to do some really, really weird stuff that might be controversial, that might be DQ related, that might be some weird stuff. I don't know. I got a weird feeling about this one. So that's my thoughts, really.
I completely hear you. I hear what you guys are saying. I can't really disagree strongly with any of those points. But what I will say is that with Josh saying that he has a almost 50% accuracy of picking Derrick Lewis fights, and with Dom acknowledging a fair few of the sort of intangible points on Derrick Lewis, I just think that the conversation about plus 200 is really where it's at. I can't confidently tell you that Derrick Lewis is going to win as a pick, but I just think it's just wide, and the weird and wonderful circus that is a Derrick Lewis fight. There is room for an underdog to catch here. That's the only logic I have, and we'll see. I don't mind getting a pick wrong. It's a weird card, so yeah, we'll roll with it. I assume that from a confidence perspective, given that both of you are picking Teixeira, neither of you are going to give me an upvote here. So I think we're going to sit on a 1, a very low. So that's fair enough. Let's just enjoy the Derrick Lewis circus, because I don't know how many more fights he's got left. Anyway, let's move on to to the next fight?
Yeah, here we have what should be a far more competitive fight than the previous one, if the odds are to be believed. Calvin Kattar against Steve Mean Machine Garcia. So yeah, this was a really interesting fight to break down. It wasn't my initial choice. Initially, I was interested in breaking down Chilean Jaquani and Jake Matthews, but I decided to veer away from that one just because Chilean Jaquani missed weight in his last fight. And yeah, we'll wait and see what happens later in the week if he can make weight. Here, Steve Garcia, he's coming in with a record of 17-5 against Kattar, who's 23-9. Their UFC records are 6-2 versus 7-7, or 7-2 if you include the contender series for Garcia. So Garcia is younger; he's 33 years old, whilst Kattar is 37. And most people who are familiar with these fighters will know that Garcia is on a tear of 5 straight KO wins, including finishes over Melky Costa, Chase Hooper, just to name 2 of the fighters he's beaten. But I think stylistically, this is a much better matchup for Kattar than his other recent fights. So recently, Kattar's been facing a very high level of competition. He's lost 4 in a row, but he's fought Yusuf Zalal, who's an excellent fighter, Aljamain Sterling, Arnold Allen, Josh Emmett. And Kattar is known for his Kattar is known for his durability. Stylistically, Kattar is just way more technical on the feet. Garcia, when I watched the tape, he's obviously powerful because he's getting these KOs, but he just looks a bit kind of loopy and sloppy. Kattar flows these straight shots down the middle. He's high accuracy. They're both pretty tenacious fighters, and by that I mean they take one to give one. So they both walk forward. But there's more miles on the clock for Kattar. Not to mention that obviously everyone's familiar with the incredible Max Holloway fight, where I think Kattar unfortunately suffered the most amount of significant strikes in a fight ever, so like 400 or something crazy. But the thing is, Garcia, whilst he has power, he's also reckless and he lacks defense. So he has his hands down a lot and he blitzes in. He has been caught earlier in his fighting career. So before he had the 5-fight win streak, he got caught countered by Mahashate in a fight and got knocked out cold. So yeah, as I mentioned, Kattar is very good, technical boxer, great straight punches. But the thing is, he doesn't move his head much, so he does get hit as well. He's hittable, but he keeps his hands up. So unlike Garcia, he's got his hands up, but he does get hit. The other thing to mention about Garcia is he does have grappling ability. So he's been taken down a few times, and he's got takedowns himself. He definitely got penchant for standing and banging though. So that's how Garcia likes to get things done generally. He likes to walk forward, create chaos, and try and capitalize on the chaos. I think the 2 other areas to talk about here are trajectory and intangibles. So if this fight was made in 2022, right after Calvin Kattar had his last win, he beat Giga Chikadze. I think these odds would just be completely flipped. I think that Steve would be like plus 200 and Kattar minus 200. But the problem is that obviously in the last 2 losses against Aljamain Sterling and Zalal, I don't think that Kattar looked great. Okay, he didn't look terrible, but he just seemed like a step behind his opponents, and he never looked great really since his loss to Holloway. I know he beat Giga Chikadze, but I think confidence is going to be a factor here. So confidence is going to be very high on the Garcia side and probably quite low on the Kattar side. That doesn't mean that Kattar can't win this fight. I think this is going to be a close fight. I actually, just before coming on here, I watched an interview that just dropped with Steve Garcia, and he was supposed to fight Edson Barboza in February, and that fell out. And he actually called out Kattar. So this is a fight he wanted. I guess Kattar was offered it and just accepted it because he thought, this is a winnable fight for him. I guess the intangibles here are, we know Kattar had a knee injury. He got injured in a fight with Arnold Allen. I don't know if that's been affecting him in his last 2 fights. Is he going to come in here with a knee strap? That would be good, because you're going to see with the way my pick is going, I hope he comes in with a knee brace or a knee strap. I guess for me, I'm not sure how Garcia is going to approach this. That's the main thing. If he mixed in any grappling, it will be a huge advantage, even just to get Kattar thinking about the takedowns, and it's going to open him up for, the big left hand, because I didn't mention this before, but Steve Garcia is a southpaw. So, fake a takedown or dip for a takedown, throw the overhand left. I think that will connect. And another intangible is I don't know really how Garcia's cardio is going to compare to Kattar's. I don't know how Kattar's cardio is. I mean, he looked pretty good in the third round of his last fight. He was hunting after Zalal, but he was already 2 rounds down at that point. So it was more a matter of pride doing that than anything, because he lost the fight. He dropped the first 2 rounds. So in conclusion, neither fighter can afford to start this fight slowly. So I think it's going to be just, meet in the middle right at the start of the fight. It's going to be fan friendly. It's going to be fun. Garcia open -150 is now a pick'em. And I think I disagree with the line movement. I think that this is going to be a war. And I think Garcia is going to come out triumphant. I think he's going to take early damage from Kattar, but because he's younger and less damaged, less miles on the clock, he's going to survive. And I think he's going to put it on Kattar. And I think he's going to finish him down the stretch. I'm 2 for 2 picking Kattar fights. So I picked Zalal to win, but I also picked Kattar to beat Chikadze. I'm just going for the younger fighter, basically, with more power, less miles on the clock. I think the big moments will be won by Garcia. Kattar's definitely going to be winning minutes with his boxing, which worries me. But Kattar marks up really easily. Just the jab of Zalal in the last fight was causing redness, swelling, bleeding. Yeah, I think this is going to be fun. It can go either way. It's not a high confidence pick. I'm going with Garcia and giving it 2 out of 3.
Yeah, so I found this one kind of tricky at the start, because I am very confused by the overall opinion that Calvin Kattar is super duper washed. Because yes, he's on a 4-fight losing streak, and there's no way you can spin that for it to seem like that's not a problem. So I absolutely acknowledge that we are seeing some regression from Calvin Kattar. But if you go through those 4 fights, right, we start off with the 25-minute split decision loss to Josh Emmett. Personally, I think he won that fight 48-47, and I wouldn't necessarily call it a robbery because it was still quite fine margins, but I was quite confident with my scorecard there. So personally, I would have given Kattar the W there. Second fight was an injury to Arnold Allen. He was losing that fight, but I mean, the injury came in, I think it was round 2. So again, what do we necessarily make of that one? I'm not sure. Obviously, an injury like that one is quite significant and is going to take a chunk out of your ability going forward when you are healed. I fully understand that. So I guess a slight knock on him for that, despite the loss itself being questionable. Aljamain Sterling was a completely different stylistic matchup for Calvin Kattar. Boom, there's the third one. I personally don't think that featherweight has a whole lot of wrestling and grappling specialists in it, especially in the time that Kattar was sort of in his prime at the top of the division. And I think going through his record, he hasn't faced too many of them. So that one was definitely a strange look for him. I bet Aljo there and was quite happy with the way that one went. And then finally, the Zalal fight. Yeah, he lost 2 rounds. It was quite disappointing to see him fail to figure out the puzzle that is Yusuf Zalal, but that fight was a tricky one for anyone with the way that Zalal has that lateral movement. A guy who's very boxing focused like Calvin Kattar is always going to struggle in a spot like that, I think. And the odds showed it. I think the odds were a bit disrespectful. I was really baffled as to how he ended up, like, what was it, plus 350 or something when he went off. It seems just quite crazy to me as a guy who has been sort of in the top 5 of the featherweight division for so long. But yeah, he looked bad there. But again, I think it's stylistically. So I somehow have a way to almost apologize and turn a blind eye to 4 consecutive losses. So to me, Calvin Kattar is not a guy that is on a 4-fight decline. I think a lot of people are looking at him like he's the next Tony Ferguson, which I just think is just crazy. I would not be surprised here if we see a Y'all Must Have Forgot performance from Calvin Kattar, because Steve Garcia is somebody I have a lot of doubt about. I will not tell you, I won't lie to you and say that he isn't a very prolific finisher. from an early KO perspective, and also he's incredibly durable. The guy has been through some wars already in the UFC, and that's, you know, very admirable and very impressive. And Calvin Kattar is going to have to be very careful for 15 whole minutes in this fight, because whilst we haven't seen Garcia go into a super long fight for a very long time, he's had some pretty brutal round ones and come back to win in round two. So you can definitely not count him out. But, you know, if I've gone and done a deep dive into Calvin Kattar's last few fights, I mean, there's also bits you can highlight on Steve Garcia that kind of really highlight and demonstrate the caliber of difference between these two. If we're talking about something more than just an early KO threat. So Shailan Nerdenbecker, he soundly beat Steve Garcia. He knocked him down and then finished him as well. I mean, things happen in MMA. It's not so simple as to just go, well, this guy knocked him out, so therefore he's better. But it's a caliber of fighter I don't think we would see even 2025 version of Calvin Kattar getting finished by. Steve Garcia was also KO'd by Mahashate. I think the exact same thing applies there. He was knocked down twice by Charlie Ontiveros. Most people probably don't even know who that is, but I think Charlie Ontiveros is in the contention for being one of the worst fighters we've ever had in the UFC. And also, Steve Garcia was controlled for 14 minutes by Luis Pena back in the day. It was his debut, I think, and probably he was up a weight class or something like that. So you don't really put too much stock into it. But 14 minutes of control time is pretty wild. I'm probably just being a hater at this point. But really, when I look at this fight, I don't really understand what respect you give Steve Garcia aside from that early KO threat, because it's a metaphor or a hypothetical that I always use. But if a time traveler suddenly appeared in the room and said, I can't tell you who wins, but all I can tell you is Steve Garcia does not knock Calvin Kattar out, then how does this fight go? I personally think it could be a Calvin Kattar masterclass, and I don't think Steve Garcia can compete with that over a longer distance. So in typical fashion for me, I'm just fading the early KO threat of a guy who is facing somebody who has a very long and detailed career at the top of featherweight and has never been KO'd. He has a KO loss on his record, but it was the injury to Arnold Allen. And obviously that can, you know, maybe happen again. God forbid it does. But like, I just think that when it comes to a heavy hitter that finishes fights in round one and doesn't get to show you their actual full capabilities on a minute-by-minute perspective because a fight ends so quickly, their kryptonite is often somebody who is able to take those shots, have those dangerous moments, and still be there. And I think Calvin Kattar can still be that guy. So I personally saw value in that plus 120 or plus 125 or whatever Calvin Kattar was like earlier in the week. So I was part of that line movement that's pushed it back to a pick 'em. Dom, you are welcome. So yeah, we'll see what happens. I think it's going to be a close. It is going to be a close fight, but it also might not be, because if Steve Garcia blitzes him early and finishes him, looks like massive value. But I also think Calvin Kattar could have a really dominant display here if this one goes longer and Steve Garcia's KO threat doesn't show itself. So it's going to look like a weird fight compared to these betting odds, but either guy could win. I do think it is a close fight. But yeah, I'm going to side with the underdog on this one.
Josh, you have to arbitrate.
I don't know if I can really. You guys have broken it down brilliantly here. I mean, I have not done much tape on this one. I don't start watching tape until next week. But from what I recall, Kattar comes from, and this is going to be a ramble, so bear with me. Kattar comes from the New England Cartel, a great boxing gym ran by Tyler, well, some guy, I forgot his name. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that that gym is pretty notorious for making fighters use their jabs early and often. And whilst that's great for Kattar because he can get his distance going, he can set up his strikes properly, I kind of question how effective those jabs or that really slow, cautious start that Kattar can often use is going to fare up against Garcia's FU power, right? I mean, because Garcia has knocked out his opponents early on in the fight, I do think that he might impose himself early. He might try and be the bully, and that might make it difficult for Kattar to, set his feet and set up his counters properly. Now, one thing I kind of expect Garcia to do that's kind of not really spoken about, I guess, but that's leg kicks. Kattar has always been a bit affected by leg kicks, and I expect it to be a decent counter to Kattar's jab. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have here for me. I need to look into this more deeper. And as for the confidence thing, I got to fade. I can't go +1 or -1 here. It's just nothing. I don't trust Garcia that much. I hate seeing a fighter at this level of competition fight like Garcia fights. He is sloppy. He is nothing but power. If he gained maybe 100 pounds, he'd make a good heavyweight. You know, just a rock'em sock'em fat person throwing down fists. You know, but looking at Kattar, you know, he is a bit up there in age. He's obviously on a bit of a downturn with his career, but he's also fought some of the best fighters in the division. So really, I don't know. I'll have to look into this even more and you know, make a proper prediction next week, I guess. Yeah, that's my yap for this one.
Yeah, so I think we're divided on this one. It's going to be interesting. I think you made some additional very good points, actually, Josh. So Steve Garcia fights out of Jackson Wink, which is John Jones's gym. That's what I wanted to mention. I forgot to mention that. And the other thing was just the kicks. Yeah, the kicks. Kattar doesn't kick at all. Like, he's just boxing. He's quite. I think that's his biggest limitation. He's a high-level fighter, high-level boxer. If he just kicked, he could be so much more effective. But Steve Garcia does have good kicks and does have good grappling. So it's just a case of, will he utilize those? Because he shouldn't stay. You know, he doesn't want a clean boxing fight with Calvin Kattar. That's pretty obvious, as you just mentioned. The jab's going to come early. It's going to come often. He knows that. He's got enough tape on Kattar. There isn't enough tape on Garcia, so I think that's going to be the interesting thing. Let's move on.
Also, before we do, congratulations to anyone who took the under on the little Calvin Kattar mispronunciation market. I think we got 3 there. So if you back the under, congratulations, you are a sharp.
All right. This is my fight to cover, so get ready for some more yap. Landwehr and Charriere is a fight that stood out to me because it's a great push for Charriere or Charriere. I don't speak French. Far from it, so bear with me. When it comes down to Landwehr, I know that he's an underdog, but there are some good reasons why they pick him, and I'll try and list them off now in no particular order. So it might sound like I'm bad-mouthing Landwehr here, but it'll come full circle. Landwehr is coming off a loss against Doo Ho Choi via ground and pound. It was a very non-competitive fight. I mean, Landwehr is just a pretty one-sided, one-dimensional fighter. He just strikes, and that's pretty much it. Whereas Doo Ho Choi has made revolutions in his game, so maybe Choi caught Landwehr off guard, and you know, that's what happens when you come in unprepared or too prepared for a striking fight, but not really ready for a wrestling exchange. The good thing about Landwehr in that fight is that he wasn't too injured, so he wasn't really knocked out clean. He was just ground and pounded into oblivion. The bad stuff here is that he is 37. He is old. He has absorbed a whole lot of damage in his career, and that's never a great thing to see when coming up against a young hotshot like Charriere. I always compare Landwehr to Gaethje, only that Landwehr is like a buy one get one free kind of guy. You know, you buy Gaethje, you get Landwehr on the side, and that's mostly because of his pressure. He doesn't really give up on the forward momentum. He strikes, he throws hammers. He doesn't care what comes back at him. It's just unrelenting pressure. And whilst Charriere is very good with his lateral movement, very good on the back foot, very good with his ability to evade strikes and defend himself accordingly, I just believe that Landwehr's forward pressure could be a major problem for Charriere here. With that said, his style is just boring. Well, maybe not boring, but it's just straightforward. Like there is no real technique. It's just like he's striking a punching bag, really. And in most fights, he kind of is. I mean, with all of his knockout wins, it's just blow after blow of punching. I expect that if this fight goes to the distance and Landwehr does utilize his forward aggression, his high pace of striking, he might still steal a decision here. So keep an eye out for those Landwehr by points scorecards, or not scorecards, props or odds. But I just don't know if I want to back Landwehr here. And the reason for that is Charriere is incredibly talented. He only has 4 fights in the UFC, and with his most toughest fight being against Nathaniel Wood, he looked pretty damn good. I mean, a loss is a loss, sure, but when you compare, well, not compare, but when you watch that fight over, you can see that Charriere does belong in the upper echelon of this division. And at the age of, 28-ish, he's got a long way to go still, but it's promising. I expect cardio to be a massive factor in this fight for Charriere also, because whilst Landwehr does utilize his forward pressure a lot, Charriere might look fresher as the fight goes on, and Landwehr does obviously absorb a lot of damage. When it comes to Charriere's style, he's very well-rounded. He is expected to strike a lot, but he's also very good at wrestling. He's so good at mixing together styles and just melding and overwhelming his opponent with so much stuff that it's hard for his opponent to really keep up. And we kind of saw that when he fought Chepe Mariscal, where Mariscal himself is a very high-paced fighter, and Charriere just matched that perfectly. Like, it was such a exhausting fight to watch, but you could tell that Charriere just belongs in those high-paced fights, and he thrives in it, really. So in order for Charriere to win this one, or at least, win in general, I guess, he needs to pressure. I mean, in this particular case, because Landwehr is a kill or be killed fighter, he needs to be on Landwehr's ass here. He needs to be the first and the last strike. He needs to be the one in Landwehr's face, wearing him down, non-stop pressure, non-stop grappling, maybe, and just, make it hell for Landwehr, because Landwehr's 37, and I'm not trying to be an ageist here, but when you hit a certain age in this kind of fight game, there is a downturn, and that downturn typically starts when the cardio fails you. And I expect Landwehr's cardio to fail him pretty much in the second and third round. As for my pick here, I got Charriere winning this one. I can't pick Landwehr. I don't like him. Not personally. I mean, he's a great guy probably, but like, I just don't trust that age. I don't trust that style against someone like Charriere. As for the confidence meter, I picked 3, medium. I guess the narrative here is, or the question here is, can we see Nate sink the ship of Morgan, the last pirate Charriere, or will Morgan derail Nate Train's hopes for a strong comeback? I guess we'll find out this weekend, and I am intrigued, but also a bit concerned. It's a very high-paced fight. It's a very crazy fight. So, yeah. What about you guys?
Nate the Train, baby. Is that all you're contributing? I love it. I did not expect that. That's well funny, man.
I just love Nate the Train. It's just so funny. No, I completely agree with Josh. I think he's going to lose. Yeah, I think for me the problem is with Nate the Train is that he was exposed a little bit by Doo Ho Choi and Dan Ige in the sense that he's just not that good anywhere. If you can survive his onslaughts, which Jamal Emmers couldn't, and he's a good fighter. David Onama couldn't, although that was an absolutely amazing fight, and that was only a majority decision apparently. Yeah, and I think the age thing as well. So I haven't got a lot to say on this. Just that I sort of recalled that Charriere struggled in the third round against Nathaniel Wood. I know that was a very high-paced fight. I don't know how much he struggled. I don't know if you watched that fight, Josh, but I seem to just recall that he slowed down a lot, and it was a very close fight. I think it was, basically 1-1, and that Nathaniel Wood won that fight based on his cardio. So I was wondering if the cardio was a factor for Charriere, but it sounds like you're pretty confident in his cardio. I didn't watch the Mariscal fight, although I know that was an upset. I know that Charriere was the favorite in that fight. So yeah, other than that, I would +1 this, to be honest. I was looking at this, and unfortunately, yeah, if the odds were better, I probably would be betting on Morgan. What about you, Will?
There are some fighters that whenever I break them down, I just can't get away from like banging the same drum and talking about the same narrative. And for me, Morgan Charriere is one of those guys because he has the worst decision record that I've ever seen in the UFC for a guy that doesn't necessarily have cardio issues. So I can't actually remember, I don't have it in front of me, what Morgan Charriere's actual like MMA record is, but he's 15-1 when fights have a finish, but he's 5-10 when they go the distance. I think it's just a crazy stark contrast. And, usually when you see that kind of disparity, it'll be for a fighter who's got clear cardio issues, like an Edmund Shabazian where he falls off a cliff. But like you don't see that with Morgan, and you also don't see anything like super low volume. It's really weird when you watch him fight. You wouldn't think that correlation really exists. And it was a big part of the reason why I bet Nathaniel Wood in his last fight, just because it all becomes a question of like how durable is the guy that you're like putting against Charriere, and do you trust them to survive and sort of work their way into the fight and grow confidence as it goes on. And yeah, so in my opinion, to have any sort of real strong confidence in Morgan Charriere, you have to believe strongly that he's going to finish his opponent. And I never know with Nate the Train, because when he came into the UFC, he was sort of like applauded as this super durable, hard-nosed dude who will walk forward, eat shots, and do it with like a Nate Diaz kind of attitude. And that is what we got. But at the same time, we also saw him get finished 3 times, KO'd 3 times. Two of them came from knees, and one of them came from a crucifix position, which, to make my uncertainty over this conundrum even more kind of like heightened, those are finish types that are very low percentage and very high damage. I think a lot of fighters, if they even the most like durable of dudes, if you take a knee flush to the chin, that'll put you out. It's not a question of your chinniness if you're getting hit with that. So I think he gets a pass for 2 of them. And then a crucifix is, I like to call it a checkmate TKO, in that a lot of the time it's not about damage, it's not about durability, it's actually all about grappling. And it's the kind of thing I think of when people say that submission artists can't win by KO. If you're getting stuck in that position, it's not about how much damage you can take. It's just the fact that your arms are literally pinned down and you're just eating shots and you cannot intelligently defend yourself, which is, the letter of the law in MMA. So I just don't know about whether or not Charriere can finish Landwehr, because I don't think Landwehr's got durability issues, but I also think he might do. I think he might be a danger to himself because, yes, I've just excused 3 KO losses, but there's no smoke without fire, and he's putting himself in those positions to get finished. So it's possible. Overall, I think that Charriere is the better fighter. And whenever I sort of think about this fight in my head, I definitely think Charriere should be winning it, as far as my mind's eye is telling me. But I think, like you alluded to, Dom, the price tag on Moore and Charriere, I believe, is about minus 250 at the moment. It's too steep for me. I can't get behind it from a betting perspective. But if asked to pick who I think is going to win, I would also go with Morgan Charriere as well. I don't personally want to give it a +1 from a confidence perspective, just because, I mean, that decision record is enough to spook me to the point where I never actually seriously consider a Charriere fight from a betting perspective unless I think he kills the guy he's fighting. But yeah, it should be an interesting one nonetheless. Charriere is such an interesting specimen for that reason.
Yeah, so with the +1 from myself and the no change from Will, we go to a high confidence in Morgan Charriere. I'll move on to our bets.
All righty, I have locked in 4 bets already, which is quite a lot for quite early. I've also got another one potentially in the pipeline, but it depends on the props. So firstly, Derrick Lewis, I went early for a 1 unit bet at +175. Obviously, you can now get that around the +200 mark. So, if you like it, you get a better price than me. I kind of fumbled that one. I won't probably be adding any more because I'm aware that it's just a bit ridiculous. Calvin Kattar, I'm on 1.5 units on him at +120. That's one I'm a little bit more confident in. Just fading Steve Garcia, really, and also fading the narrative that Kattar is super washed. I don't think that's the case. I'm interested in Gabriel Bonfim to win by submission. I'm quite confident he wins that fight. He should do anyway. And for me, the question more becomes a case of, does he finish or does he win a decision? I've seen that the fight goes the distance is kind of a coin toss at the moment, so the books kind of agree with that questioning. Personally, I think a submission early on is going to be like the most price effective way to bet on the fight. So I'm kind of flirting with the idea on that one, but it's all price number dependent, so I'm not too sure. Chidi Njokuani, I've bet him for 1.5 units at -120. I think he is a superior striker to Jake Matthews at this stage in both men's careers. There's a couple of question marks on Chidi from an intangible perspective, the weight cut, the age, which I think are concerns. So I'm kind of considering the idea of cashing out of this at the weigh-ins if he doesn't look great. But I think if we get the man that shows up in his last 3 fights, he should have enough to beat Jake Matthews. And I think -120 is a steal if those intangibles don't come to fruition. And Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Volta Walker under 2.5 rounds. I've bet that for 2 units at -137. I just don't understand that price. I'm contrary to the last 2 episodes of this podcast, I'm not a big heavyweight guy, but as far as I'm concerned, the chances of a finish in those fights is always a bit more likely. Kennedy Nzechukwu has KO'd almost every opponent he's beaten in the UFC. I think the stat was 10 of his 13 fights have not seen the distance. And Walker, after a very underwhelming debut that went the distance, he's had 2 submission wins in under a minute. So in my opinion, there's just a lot of question marks about Walker still. The books don't quite know what kind of a fighter he is, and they've kind of fumbled it here number-wise. I think Nzechukwu should be getting a finish on the feet, or Walker should be really threatening on the ground. So in a very binary style clash like that, where both guys are dangerous, why do they expect it to almost go to a decision? I know there's a narrative at the moment where a heavyweight fight hasn't finished in like 100 days or something like that, but that's a non-issue. That's not how this game works. There's no correlation there. It's just a trend. So I'm hoping that trend stops here. So I've invested on that one. That's probably all I'm going to have for this week. But obviously, if you check out my Reddit post throughout the week or see what I'm posting on Discord, there may be some additions, but that's probably going to be the crux of the week for me.
And this is my slate, and for the first time, I think probably in 10 episodes, we've never gone against each other head to head quite like this. I was feeling pretty confident in Bonfim when that fight was announced, and I just parlayed him quite early with Garcia, so I got quite poor odds of -140 when I parlayed him. I've actually put the updated odds here, so if you parlay Bonfim and Garcia together today, now that Garcia is -110, you get +145. That's actually not the odds I got. I got like +120. I also parlayed Bonfim with Teixeira. So yeah, Will and I are going head to head this week pretty much. And then, because the line moved and I'd already done the analysis and I was feeling like Garcia was the side, I was like, well, I've done the analysis. I thought my minus 140 was a fair line for Garcia. So now it's evens. I've got to take him basically. I'm just going to take everything in my willpower not to go beyond 1 unit because I don't think it's worth it with the sort of all the things we've discussed and the intangibles, not knowing how Garcia really looks past round 2. Yeah, I just think that he's a dog. I think he's going to get it done, and that's the thing I got to contain this week, not to put more money on Garcia. Then I just thought, the thing that Max Griffin line is getting out of control here. I think he was going to lose to Curtis, but Curtis hasn't had a knockout for a while. Max Griffin fights long. He only has to win a round. If that's plus money, I'd be really interested in Griffin winning a round. I actually think he can win the whole fight, to be honest. I think Curtis gets frustrated. We've seen Curtis frustrated so many times. He's like shouting at Hermanson in the cage, like, come on, fight me. It's like, no, you have to chase him. So I think if Griffin can enact that kind of game plan, I think he could be very good value. He's at plus 250 now. I think he's just going to go up. He's going to be plus 300 come fight night. I'm not sure if I'll get to the money line, but I like this point spread. He just has to win 1 round. And Max Griffin won a round against Michael Morales. So, I don't know if anyone thinks Curtis is better than Michael Morales. Probably not. So I really think that's going to be a value bet. We've already talked about Bonfim. I think he's pretty dangerous. I think I'm considering the inside the distance, but I think the price has to be right. It has to be plus money. And finally, we talked about Teixeira. He blitzes forward. He's averaging 14 significant strikes per minute because he's basically just had 2 fights in the UFC, and he's just going to blitz forward. He's kill or be killed. I hope he does that this weekend because it's going to be fun either way. Either he gets KO'd or he'll KO Derrick Lewis.
Yeah, this is my kind of bets that I recommend to take for, like, I guess this episode. Because as you know, I don't make my bets fully available until I post my write-up on Reddit on Wednesday. But as you can see there, Charriere, Landwehr over 2.5 rounds. I don't know what the odds are, but they're probably pretty okay. And the niche parlay that I always try and make during these episodes is that the fights that end in KO, and in which I got Petrino, Lane, Kattar, Garcia, and Lewis Teixeira. So that's pretty much all I got. And I mean, as you guys know, I post my stuff on Wednesday on the MMA betting subreddit. So yeah, short and sweet from me.
Right. Let's turn UFC Nashville into UFC Cashville. Let's place a bet. We discussed this before we came on, and we decided that we liked the value on Kennedy. Not going to try and pronounce his surname as eloquently as Will did it. So Enza Chikubu. I can't do it. I was very impressed that you got that. The minute you got that, I was like, right, that's the bet to make. So we discussed it. We like the under 2.5. Can you guys see my screen, by the way? You can see this, right? Yeah.
Yep.
And we were playing with the amount. So we start with $100. We're on 177. We decided that we're going to put kind of like the profit that we've made onto this bet. And this is our Vegas fund so that we can go to the UFC X International Fight Week 2026. So as you can see, we've been running this for about 4 weeks. We've hit 3 times. We had Benny Dariush last week for $50. We had the over 2.5 with Bahamondes and Fiziev. We lost a Spivak bet, and we won a Nascimento bet. So that's the $100 challenge for this week. Now we're moving on to our fireside chat. What is your most memorable fight and why?
All right, I got 2 most memorable fights. One of them for a grappling perspective, and one of them from a striking perspective. So the first one is a fight I think that opened the main card on a UFC London back in like 2018-19. It was Thiago Santos versus Jimmy Manuwa. It's a very, again, neither of those names are particularly relevant to the UFC in the 2020s. So why have I chosen this fight? You'll have to see for yourself, but my God, it is an absolute banger. It is exactly the kind of fight that you would want from a light heavyweight scrap. It's two dudes who are built like brick shit houses, absolutely swinging. It's like only power shots. There's no jabbing. They both walk forward. They're both absolutely chucking it at each other. It is insane. People get hurt. I won't spoil who wins. You probably know, but it's just chaos. I can't recommend watching it enough, but it's the fight that ever since it happened, I've always said, if you want to watch an MMA fight just to see how batshit crazy MMA can be, that is the fight to watch. It's Jimmy Manuwa versus Thiago Santos. And yeah, you won't be disappointed if you watch it. So for anyone who doesn't remember that one, please go and check it out. It is absolutely crazy. And
I have to interrupt there, Will, because I have to interject because that was literally my first live UFC event I ever went to. That was literally my birthday in 2017, and it was actually my wife that bought me the tickets. So, shout out to her, because I don't think I'd be so obsessed with the UFC if it wasn't for her. So obviously I know the outcome of that specific main event, but I also know what happened through the whole card. So another interesting thing that happened in that card was Brad Pickett retired. It was Chito Vera. I don't think it was Chito Vera's first fight, but he beat Brad Pickett, and Brad Pickett is the coach of Lonnie Kavanagh and Nathaniel Wood. So yeah, I think that's a very left field choice. I wasn't expecting that, but it's a fight of significance for me because I was there in the crowd, in the nosebleeds, could barely see anything. But yeah, good choice.
Yeah, that must have been absolutely insane to see live because, yeah, I still can remember. I genuinely, just from talking about it for the last 30 seconds, as soon as we finish with this recording, I'm going to go and watch it again. Like, that's how much I enjoy that fight. It's absolutely crazy. Being there live must have been insane. I mentioned another fight as well. So from a grappling perspective, I can't remember exactly which card it was. I want to say it was like UFC 140 maybe is a guess off the top of my head, but it was Nogueira versus Frank Mir, the second fight that they had. Obviously at the time, for heavyweights, Big Nog and Frank Mir were regarded as two of the most elite Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu based grapplers that the UFC had. And when you get those kind of fights, you don't know what to expect. Sometimes it's going to be a striking fight, sometimes it's going to be a grappling fight, but there's a bit of everything in that one. So Frank Mir gets hurt by Big Nog. He gets wobbled. It looks like it's gonna result in Big Nog taking him down and going for a submission. And then out of nowhere, you get the sickest transition and finish in from a grappling perspective that the UFC has ever seen. It's better than Demetrius Johnson's flying arm bar on Ray Borg. It's so good. So I think Frank Mir manages to find his way on top after being hurt. He's dazed and confused. He's barely in the fight. He's got a Kimura. He's setting up a Kimura. And then Big Nog hits this ridiculous reversal where he fully rolls over and ends up on top, but he's only on top for half a second before Mir takes that momentum and then rolls him. They literally roll from top to bottom to top. And then just when you think that's oh my God, amazing, Frank Mir locks in the Kimura properly, really extends the Kimura and snaps Big Nog's arm, and you see it pop. It's brutal. It's it's everything that's amazing about MMA. You've got technicality and you've got violence, and it's absolute cinema. Genuinely, they could make a film about MMA and you could not choreograph a fight sequence that ends like that. I'm speaking about this really passionately because it's an absolutely brutal fight. You need to go watch it. So that's another fight you should definitely watch. I can't get that one out of my head. It's another fight that I recommend to people if they want to understand MMA in more than just a brawling sense, because the technicality on display is amazing. So that's Big Nog versus Frank Mir 2, somewhere around UFC 100 to 150. I can't remember exactly which one, but yeah, check that one out.
I haven't actually seen that fight myself. I know the fight you're referring to, but I haven't seen it. And I was a big fan of Big Nog back in the day, so I will check it out. Josh, do you have a fight you want to bring up?
Yeah, it's a bit of a casual fight. You guys are probably going to make fun of me, which is fine. I welcome it. But McGregor versus Khabib is one that kind of sticks to my mind. Not necessarily because of the fight itself, but the build-up, I suppose. I mean, there was so much animosity, so much fire and fury, so many controversial remarks back and forth, and from the press conference to the bus incident to the post fight issues and the riots and Dominic Cruz going, "Oh shit," live on the mic and all that crap. It's really cool to see. I mean, I know that sounds weird to say, but like the build-up kind of led to that, right? I mean, it was a great fight. It was competitive, but then with every fight with bad blood, you expect more because sometimes a fight's never enough. Sometimes you have to have a post-fight fight, right? And that's pretty much what happened. I mean, Khabib jumping into the crowd, Conor getting punched by Khabib's cousins or whatever. It was like a kebab shop fight, basically, in the middle of the night. It was crazy. And I remember this specifically because it was one of the most hyped fights of the UFC at that day, at the time, right? Like, everyone who wasn't really a big UFC fan was a fan then. They were watching, they tuned in. And so, yeah, it was crazy. It was nuts, and I loved it, yeah.
Yeah, I think for anyone that doesn't know, that is a seminal fight. I don't think it was a bad choice at all. I think it was a really good choice. It took place in 2018, and I think this is correct. I mean, it's definitely the biggest pay-per-view card of all time from a UFC perspective. But I think even in terms of pay-per-views for fight sports, I think only Mayweather, Pacquiao, and Mayweather McGregor had bigger buy rates than the UFC 229. So yeah, it was definitely a seminal moment in UFC history. It was like, it was like, what were you doing? Where were you, on that moment? Because that's what it was for me. It's just hearing you mention it, I was like, what a great choice. I was thinking, because like that really, it changed the course of history for me in a sense that up until that point, McGregor had been kind of, I wouldn't say a hero, but he'd been, blazing a trail in the sport. And I think that was the beginning of the end for him. And the McGregor we're all familiar with now, the guy who's kind of lost his way and you just don't know, what he's doing, right? He's just like not a good example to anyone. At some point he was a good example in terms of like, trying to achieve something and trying to coming from nothing, right? And building something. And that was really after he lost that fight. I think in the build-up, you mentioned the animosity in the build-up. I think he was already like selling his whiskey or planning to sell his whiskey or drinking in the pre-fights. He's already getting really, really strange. That was, McGregor was always interesting to watch in the build-up to fights like against Diaz and so forth. But that was the first one where something seemed really off in the build-up. It was still a great fight. He still managed to turn up and give Khabib probably his toughest UFC fight in his whole career, which says something about McGregor. He really was a talented fighter, like not on the level of grappling of Khabib, but he was talented. So yeah, I love that choice. Do you have any recollections of that fight, Will?
Yeah, it's funny for me because I was working my first job in the sports betting industry. I was working in a betting shop at the time, and it was the only time I can remember that MMA really did make its way to the mainstream. Like in the UK specifically, no one cares about MMA really. They do a little bit more now that we have actual UK representation, but no one really knew who Michael Bisping was. People all knew who Conor McGregor was. And you'd have like these 40, 50, 60-year-old blokes coming in who only ever bet on the horses or only ever bet on like a football accumulator or whatever, soccer for the US fans. And like suddenly they were all like, oh, who's this Conor McGregor, blah, blah. And everyone like who came to the shop locally like knew that I was really into the UFC. So it felt really nice to be doing kind of what I do now, where I was like giving out betting advice and tips and saying, do bet this guy, don't bet this guy. I had very strong opinions on Khabib there, thinking he was going to steamroll him. So I correctly gave out the tip of Khabib to win by submission to a bunch of 60-year-old men from Manchester. So they are very welcome. But yeah, no, it's a crazy fight, wasn't it? I think the thing that makes it so memorable for me is that obviously all of the build-up and the anticipation was insane, but it absolutely delivered because it wasn't just a one-sided beatdown. McGregor gave Khabib some of the toughest looks he's ever had from a grappling perspective. I think we've all seen that transition. I think it's currently doing the rounds on social media for some reason, where, you know, Khabib goes for the single leg and McGregor does a really good job of like sprawling, and they literally grapple in this 50-50 position for like 45 seconds. It was really inspiring to see McGregor actually like having an answer for it in a career where he was never really tested that much grappling wise, and people thought he'd get absolutely smoked. So it had intrigue before, it had intrigue during, and then, I mean, obviously it had intrigue after with the animosity and the chaos that brewed after the back of it. I remember, obviously, as a UK fan, I was, you know, squinting at the screen watching it at like 5-6 in the morning. But I remember when it happened, I was really disappointed, because obviously for me that entire day had been the general, like, normal UK community cares about MMA. This is such a big moment for a sport that I love and have dedicated so much of my like time and passion into. It's finally on the center stage. We get to see MMA at its best, two elite guys, and then it ended like that. And it, I know, like, you know, for those who enjoy MMA as like the blood sport kind of vibe, it's great to see that passion, like, you know, chaos, woo, kill each other, but like, you don't get many opportunities to really enter the mainstream in the UK from a sporting perspective, and that was the chance, and they completely blew it, and they just sort of like pissed away any respect that a lot of fans may have had for that fight. So it ended on a real sour note for me personally. I was quite disappointed by that, but the fight itself and the circus that came with it was definitely memorable.
Yeah, it was a very memorable fight, and I miss the Khabib McGregor animosity. I think it was very. I just remember when I think when Khabib called him out, he said, "Give me your chicken. I want to fight with your number one chicken." easiest fight in lightweight division. It was. I think he was the only person to take a round off. Khabib was McGregor. I basically don't think Khabib lost a round in his whole career. I think he was 29-0, basically just steamrolling people until he fought McGregor. And I think that's right. I know he fought Raging Al Iaquinta, but I think Raging Al lost all the rounds against him in a 5-round fight. For me, a memorable fight probably is that one. But after that, it would be, you know, Bisping. Before he became the middleweight champion, he fought Anderson Silva in what was a very memorable fight, because basically Anderson Silva flying kneed Bisping unconscious at the end of the third round after the horn or after the bell, and I can't remember what ensued, but there was obviously a kerfuffle, and they were trying to figure out what to do. Bisping sort of recovered. He was basically unconscious. He recovered, and they decided crazily just to keep going with the fight. Like, this was back in, you know, it was a bit less orderly than I think nowadays that would be like a DQ. But yeah, Bisping wanted to continue, and then he won the next 2 rounds. And after winning that fight, he went on to fight Luke Rockhold at short notice and famously knocked him out as well. So that was my fight. And let's see what's next.
Oh boy. So yeah, if we shrunk Derrick Lewis down to the size of each weight class, how would he do? I'm just imagining it. Can you imagine like a 5'5" Derrick Lewis or something? That's hilarious. I mean, as a light heavyweight, yeah, probably the same guy. I think he would have less success, obviously, as the weight classes go down, because speed becomes more of a factor. Speed, volume, diversity, all of the things Derrick Lewis doesn't have become more and more of a factor as you go down the weight classes. But
does incredible power, does it obviously if he's like 5'5", does he have incredible durability but only throws 1 punch per minute or something?
Oh yeah, can you imagine that?
Joshua Van.
Yeah, Josh Van trying to hit, like, just keep distance and like hit him with like long shots as opposed to getting hit by one Derrick Lewis nuke. Oh my god, this is great. I kind of now, of all the talk about me thinking that MMA is like an honorable sport and talking about the purity of 3-dimensional fighters and stuff, I kind of want a scientist to actually do this now. This would be amazing. But yeah, I would assume Derrick Lewis would probably have less success as the divisions go down. He could probably do well in women's MMA though, if we had Deborah Lewis. That would work. But I don't know. it's such a funny thing to think about.
Yeah, I think it was a good place to end. I don't know, Josh, if you want to comment on Deborah Lewis. I think, didn't they just pass a law in the US that transgender women can't compete in... transgender women can't compete in women's sports anymore. So Deborah Lewis would have to be born Deborah Lewis. She couldn't have been Derrick Lewis, who had a operation.
Yeah, we're not going to get another Fallon Fox incident. That's a legitimate transgender fighter that fought in the mixed martial arts world. But no, I got no freaking answer for this one. I'm just, what? Like, what? I don't know how to really think about this. Like, no matter what I picture, it just doesn't work. So, what? Yeah, thanks, Will.
It's the thought experiment you never knew you wanted to hear about that the world needed.
Well, there you have it. I think things kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but we'll wrap things up there. So thank you very much to everybody for listening. We've been your three hosts. That brings our analysis of UFC Nashville to a close. Thank you very much for listening. If you're watching or listening to this on YouTube, please drop us a subscription, a like, and maybe even a comment. Tell us who you're picking for this card, and what you think of our analysis. If there's anything you agree with or disagree with, we'd love to hear it. The engagement's always great. We will get this up on Spotify, so if you're listening on Spotify, coming over to YouTube and dropping a comment would also be much appreciated. Thanks for tuning in. We will be back next week. The UFC runs at such a quick pace these days, I can't even remember what next week's card is, but either way, we'll be there. We'll be there to break it down, and hopefully we'll see you there. So thank you very much for listening.